Deputy Paul Donnelly.
Minister, I recently attended the AGM of a local community centre, and I'd like to outline some of the serious situations that they face in the coming months, and indeed, most importantly, in 2021. And indeed, not just them, but many community centres and projects. This community centre has 8 members of staff and a coordinator. They get a grant from pobal for about $184,000 for those staff. The funding hasn't been increased since 2013, meaning that the funding hasn't even kept up with inflation. This works out at €9.39 per hour, and the national minimum wage, as you know, is $10.10. It means that the Voluntary Management Committee and the Centre Manager have to look at how they raise extra funding to cover the shortfall of 71 cents per hour for every member of staff. So how do they do it? Well, they have a cafe, and it offers really affordable food to many people who use it not just to grab a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and a breakfast or a lunch, but they use it to connect with people in the community. And it's very, very important facility for people who have no one else to speak to that day. And the manager has said to me that there's a number of people who come in every day, not just for food or the coffee, it is to connect with people. They have several rooms that are in constant use all day, every day, and the price structure is kept deliberately low and affordable for many of those community groups because they also don't have enough funding. They get funding from Feroga, which provides an amazing space for young people in the community, and they have a brilliant creche, a community creche that caters for many young parents in the Huntstown community. When they desperately need funding for repairs and big maintenance jobs, the community always rallies round, and they're constantly writing up funding submissions for a couple of €1,000 here and there from Fingal or for some other organisation. As you know, Minister, the time and energy taken up by constantly worrying about how they'll pay the wages, how they'll keep the cafe open, how they'll pay for essential maintenance and upkeep of what is now an old building can be overwhelming for many community groups, and it shouldn't have to be this way. They're providing a service that in some ways the state should be providing, and yet they have to struggle day in, day out. And this was before COVID. So that was before everything utterly changed, not just for this community centre, but I think for every single community centre and community project throughout this state. Whether they be under the ownership of a local authority, and in some way they're protected in that way, but if they're outside of that remit, they aren't protected in that way, and they rely very much on the local community and the resources that they have. But we know that many of those rooms that they now have will not be able to be in use because they can't socially distance. We know the cafe is going to lose out on a huge amount of business because they won't be able to use the same number of tables, and there won't be the same number of people be able to come in and out of that centre. Fundraising, we know, is going to be hugely affected because so many people have been so badly hit during the pandemic. And I think, you know, I obviously have been involved in many community projects in the last number of months during the lockdown, and to see the amount of money that's being fundraised by communities is astonishing. But that well, I think, is now it's starting to dry up, and people are really struggling. So we know these community centres are going to either close down or they're going to really struggle, and they need that safety net of the government covering, at the very minimum, I would say, the living wage, but at the very minimum, the minimum wage that they need. So what we're looking for, I suppose, is a commitment from the government that when we look at this stimulus package that is coming out, that it needs to include the local community centres, local projects, that they aren't going to be as adversely affected, because some of them, it'll be okay for 2019. But mark my words, the fear is 2021, that the cumulative effect of all of these measures that put in place for social distancing is going to have a really, really detrimental effect on them.
Thank you, Deputy. Antara.
I thank the Deputy for his input. I recall we both shared a different chamber not so long ago, and I recall him defending passionately his own community in that as well. So there weren't too many speeches I remember from that chamber, but that was one of them. And I thank you for doing that, and I thank you for defending what is really a crucial community resource here as well. There are kind of two halves to the answer to your question. I think there is the structural funding issue, and I understand my department provided some funding in that regard at the beginning of this year to upkeep of the actual structures themselves. But really, I think what in essence you're talking about is really the Community Services Fund from my department, which does support over 400 organisations, like the Deputy has described, to provide really crucial and important services across the country via what's described as a social enterprise model. So the CSP is an essential programme that provides a range of community, business and social enterprises to deliver a range of local services and employment opportunities. Community centres are one example, Means All Wheels in Balbriggan in my own area, Skerry's Mills, Cafe and so on, really crucial community focal points. And these are services being delivered in marginalised and isolated communities that would not be delivered were it not for the Community Services Programme, which is supporting over 2,000 real jobs across the country. Now, CSP funding is provided as a fixed annual contribution towards the costs of an agreed number of full-time equivalent positions, including a manager where warranted. €32,000 per annum is provided towards the costs of a manager position, €19,033 per annum towards the costs of a full-time equivalent position. These positions are permanent jobs and not activation programme positions that only last for a defined period of time. So the CSP programme is a contribution towards these salaries. These jobs are not on the payroll directly of the department. That's, I suppose, an important distinction to make. The funding is a fixed annual contribution and must be co-funded by the organisations concerned from other resources, for example, income generated from the use of facilities and services provided. And I acknowledge the Deputy's outlining of the difficulty actually providing that part of the funding in the current situation. Supported organisations are obliged under the Community Services Programme to pay their employees at least the minimum wage level, and I am aware that there are a number of CSP supported organisations who are paying their staff the living wage of $12.30 per hour. All that said, during the COVID-19 crisis, a significant number of CSP supported services were unable to open or operate for a lengthy period of time, thereby reducing their ability to generate the required income, as stated. Now, to address this, the Department does have a fund to assist CSP supported organisations to retain their staff on the payroll during the COVID-19 restrictions when normal trading or other revenue activities have been ceased or curtailed. The fund is providing additional funding to CSP-supported organisations the most in need to enable them to pay their full-time CSP-supported employees $350 net per week, with a proportionate amount for part-time CSP-supported employees. So I suppose the distinction is important to make in that my department is supporting the positions. They are not payrolled by the department. That's why there's the full wage isn't covered. And I think coming from the area that I am, it's wise to have several income streams when you're trying to protect these crucial jobs as well. In 2019, the Department appointed Indecon Economic Consultants to conduct an independent review of the programme, and I'll be examining that with my officials in the weeks ahead to see how we can progress the programme and hopefully grow the programme as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Donnelly, 2 more minutes.
Sir. I thank you for the reply, and I do welcome the fact that there was extra funding in relation to COVID, and also the fact that we had the COVID payment that was provided. But I suppose this is the crux of, I suppose, the discussion that we're having here, is that the CSP funding is a fixed annual contribution towards the cost of an agreed number of full-time positions, including the manager. And unfortunately, it doesn't cover, it doesn't bring it up to the minimum wage. As I said, the cost is $9.38 per member of staff, and the minimum wage is $10.10, and it hasn't increased in a very long time, as I already said. So I think that there is a structural and a fundamental issue in relation to the CSP, and my belief should be, and I think the belief of many community organisations, that at the very minimum, the minimum wage should be the one that's covered. And that's just, as I said, that's prior to COVID. I think post-COVID, we are in a completely and utterly different situation. And I do look forward, because I do accept your genuineness in relation to supporting communities. And I do look forward to, I suppose, your analysis of this report that's been provided and how we can move forward in relation to supporting communities. Because at the end of the day, you and I know that these are the heart and soul of our communities. They're the heart and soul of the people who provide the service and also the people who use the service. And if they're not there, if we don't have them, that person who goes in for that cup of tea or that coffee doesn't get to speak to somebody that day. Somebody who wishes to, young people who wish to use that centre, it won't be there. They'll be on the street corner. You know, and I just think it's really important that when we're looking at funding, when we're looking at community centres, and we're looking at how we fund our community, that we look in it in a way that's as supportive as it possibly can.
Thank you, Deputy.
To assure the Deputy, on my watch, these services will be there, and I will do everything to ensure that they will continue to be there. It is a requirement of receiving support under the programme that our organisations are obliged to pay at least the minimum wage. CSP funding is for social enterprises who are in a position to generate income to match the CSP contribution. This is a minimum requirement under the programme. If the programme were to increase the funding contribution to align to the minimum wage, it could cost an additional €4 million per annum, and it would be necessary to close the programme to new applicants and would limit any potential changes to the scheme that may be considered in the light of the Indecon review. I am conscious that in the current crisis, organisations are struggling to generate income, and that is why approximately €1 million is being provided to the organisations currently being supported by the programme through additional funding. The fund was established for an initial 12-week period for all organisations who were in financial need, but my department has extended it on an exceptional case-by-case basis and in line with the roadmap for reopening. It is targeted at those organisations most in need. And just to reiterate and to recap my commitment to the Deputy that these kind of crucial services, focal points, outlets for the community, facilities where people can organise and feel part of the place that they're from, I'll do everything I can to make sure that they continue to be there, and not only that, but to grow as well, and to grow in their reach as well. Thank you.